This guy I just love. He is so exceedingly evil. He just oozes darkness, and he just loves being evil. He revels in it. And that would be Elder Toguro from Yu Yu Hakusho. Seriously, this guy just revels in all the evil acts that he commits, particularly in his fight with Kuwabara. He just rubs in Genkai's death and tries to use it against Kuwabara, and laughs exceedingly at Genkai's plight with that evil cackle of his and that wormy voice. I find it very interesting that despite the fact that their origins were similar and that they became demons for the same reason, between the two Toguro brothers, while younger Toguro, despite all the horrible things he does, is somewhat sympathetic and sort of redeemed at the end of his arc, Elder Toguro just, I think, went completely all the way and just became completely absorbed by the darkness of his own soul. And the great thing about him is he's such a cool villain that he came back. I mean, he was a recurring villain. He came back in a later arc, and he actually became probably one of the most dangerous villains in that series, maybe in all of anime. He was really dangerous. His fight against Kurama was pretty awesome as well. So definitely for evilest anime villains, I'm going to say Elder Toguro. This guy just was incredibly evil and loved every second of it. Moving on to number 6. The question was, who is your favorite anime henchman? And this was tough. This was really tough for me because there are so many great henchmen out there, and I'm going to kind of cheat by listing a few that I just want to mention. Zarbon and Dodoria from Dragon Ball Z. I mean, as villains, as henchmen, I thought they were a lot more interesting and just more intimidating than Ginyu Force overall. And they were just really awesome. They were great contrasting personalities. They were both cruel and also incredibly loyal to Frieza. And I thought they really exuded and represented everything that Frieza's empire had done. They were just a really good introduction to the forces that Krillin, Gohan, and the others would have to face throughout the rest of the arc. I mean, these guys reveled in slaughtering innocent people like they were nothing. Dodoria basically kills a small child in front of his father, just completely, utterly destroying villages. I just always found those guys very interesting, and I could talk about them both a lot longer, so I'll move on. I also want to quickly mention Iced from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, because this guy, that guy was just completely badass. He could create a mini dimension and zoom around and people's bodies apart. I mean, probably one of the most incredibly powerful stands I've ever seen in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. He was a great villain, great henchman, and I actually think he was greater than Dio, honestly. I don't know how Dio got control of that guy. I guess it really just showcases how manipulative and awesome Dio is that he could gain control of somebody like Iced. It's really worth noting. But honestly, my favorite anime henchman is Goshinki from Inuyasha. And I think that's because of all of Naraku's children slash henchmen, extensions of himself, whatever you want to call it, up to that point, Kaguya and Kana were designed partially to go after the Shikon Jewel, and Inuyasha was sort of a secondary goal, but Naraku designed Goshinki specifically to destroy Inuyasha. And he's only in one episode, but it's my favorite episode of Inuyasha because Goshinki is such a frightening creature. He knows exactly what he is. There's a great line where Inuyasha is basically grilling Goshinki, like, why did you kill all these people? Like, what's the purpose of it? Goshinki knows what his purpose is, and he doesn't question it. He just is pure destruction personified. He says this line where he's like, "My lord Naraku sent me to consume everything in this village, and that's exactly what I did. I consumed every cow, horse, and chicken, every man, woman, and child." He brutally devoured all of these people. He left nothing in his wake, just complete death and destruction. And on top of that, he was an intelligent villain. He's this big, purple, horned reptilian monstrosity, but even better, he can read your thoughts. So he can predict your every move, and on top of that, he was really fast despite his size. And perhaps most of all, his teeth were so strong that they broke the Tetsaiga, Inuyasha's sword, forcing Inuyasha to release his full demon power, which ultimately left Goshinki completely destroyed because he couldn't read his thoughts due to Inuyasha being in a pure blood rage. However, even after he was killed, his awesomeness would still prevail, and that his teeth were used to forge Shishomaru's other sword, the Tokijin. Probably my favorite sword in the entire show. So, even in death, Goshinki is still probably the most awesome henchman I've ever seen in anime. I just love Goshinki. Number 5. My favorite female villain. It's kind of funny, a lot of people were saying, oh man, this is hard, there aren't that many good female villains in anime, and I can assure you, there are quite a few good ones out there. And, I heard some pretty good ones. And I'll be honest, I was thinking about it, and I was like, oh man, I'm gonna have a hard time with this one. I really wanted to say, the mother from Speedgrapher, because that lady was dang evil. She was just a horrible person. Not likable at all in any way. It's kind of funny. The answer was really obvious and kind of staring me right in the face, but I forgot about her, and then I realized I know easily who my favorite female anime villain is, and that's Dante from Fullmetal Alchemist. This woman is so vile and evil and manipulative, and the thing about this woman in this version of Fullmetal Alchemist, it's different from the manga. And in contrast to Father, even though her goals are basically the same, her motivations are so different. And I think the thing that makes her so interesting is that she's a human being, and her main reason for manipulating the government and causing all those deaths and turning all those people against each other just to forge the Philosopher's Stone, ultimately to preserve her own beauty and seek immortality. That's really what it was. She just wanted to be young and live forever, and because she had the knowledge to use other people, with all her alchemic abilities, she believed that she was superior to other people, and she could use that knowledge to destroy other people's lives for centuries over and over again, just because she didn't want to accept the fact she was going to die. She wanted to be immortal. And really just messing with the Elric brothers was just kind of a way of getting back at Hohenheim, who was her lover, who rejected her due to her rather radical shift in belief systems regarding alchemy and human life. So really, Dante is quite frankly probably the evilest ex-girlfriend in fiction. This woman is just so evil, and the fact that she's really willing to do all these things for such a petty reason really kind of brought her to life, because it was something that I could really see somebody doing. Something that simple, but very believable in a lot of ways, and she's just scary. The fact that such an evil can emanate from a human being is, I think, a little bit scarier than Father, who is sort of a supernatural being who is both greater and less than a human. So, for that alone, I have to give her points for originality and just somebody that I would not want to meet. Dante from Fullmetal Alchemist. Number 4, my favorite group. I'll be honest, there are a lot of groups of anime villains that I would like. I mean, I love the Akatsuki, I love the Ginyu Force, the Phantom Troop, the Sensui 7, Team Togoro. There are a bunch, but just for the sake of just saying something different, I'm just going to say the Student Council from Revolutionary Girl Utena. These people dealt with incredible forces on like a weekly basis, fighting amongst each other and trying to plan out, give the world a new rebirth, but also take control of that power in the way they saw fit. And these people were high schoolers. These people are so arrogant, so pompous, so high and mighty, but at the same time, they're just petty children, really. It's just amazing how overdramatic they are, and how willing they all are to pursue this power and hurt Anthe and Utena and destroy their relationship and manipulate each other. And it's just dirty, and quite frankly, it's disturbing. These characters are very human, but the lengths that they're willing to go to achieve their power that they're seeking is just, honestly, something that gets under your skin. They're a rather despicable group of people, but they're also kind of fascinating. Number 3 was a 2-part question. You could pick between your least favorite anime villain and an anime villain you believe to be the most overrated. Well, I can tell you right now that there are a number of villains I guess you could say that were overrated, but the one I decided to pick was Aizen. It's not that I think he's a bad villain. I actually think in a lot of ways he was a very good villain. But he was really overused, and I don't think he was built up quite as well as he could have been. Even though his twist was really awesome, he's become kind of a joke due to his almost ridiculous ability to plan things out ahead of time. Overall, his arc was just dragged out to the point where you didn't really even care about him that much as a main villain, despite all his motivations. He definitely had potential to reach beyond cliché, but kind of fell back into a lot of shonen battle series stereotypes. So Aizen's probably up there for me. As far as the anime villain that I hate the most, that is hands down Siegfried from Kenichi, the Mighty's Disciple. This guy was just annoying as hell. He's one of the 8 Fists of Ragnarok, and he was probably my least favorite. His gimmick was that he constantly sang and hummed melodies to himself while he was fighting. This allowed him to keep fighting and gave him an edge in his techniques against Kenichi. And while admittedly it was kind of funny, overall, this guy was just annoying and I hated him. And it might have had something to do with the voice actor, to be perfectly honest, but one of the many things about that show that just kind of ticked me off. But that's a conversation for another time. So Siegfried, yeah, I really don't like that villain at all. Now we get to some really good stuff. My favorite anime villain. The question number 2. Now, this is really tough, and I realize now looking back on it how hard this was for people, probably. I mean, these are really tough questions, and the last 2 were definitely the toughest. But my favorite anime villain Well, I'll get a few honorables out of the way. I mean, I'm sure this could change like month to month, but I mean, Perfect Cell is really up there for me. Really is awesome. I love Toguro. I love Hisoka. Everybody knows that. I love Frieza and Arlong and Knives Millions from Trigun, among many others. Pain from Naruto. That there's a ton. The villain that I honestly would say would probably be my favorite would be Tenzin from Basilisk. This guy was so awesome. He was so evil, and he was so badass, and he just had a really strong presence to him. You could tell that he was somebody who had been influenced by the environment around him for many, many years. He was incredibly old, and all he had known was hate and war, and that was all that he excelled at, really. He was so bound by the traditions of his time and his family that really the idea of peace with another clan would be virtually impossible to him. And the interesting thing about Tenzin is, as vile as he is, I mean, he essentially tries to rape Oboro, his cousin, not once, but twice. In probably some of the scariest moments in the series. And I'm thinking, and not to give anything away, but we find that the sacrifice that he made for his power is quite disturbing. In many ways, he's a lot less human than he probably once was, and the times really did affect him and turn him into something really monstrous. But even despite that, there is some good within him. He has a sense of honor, and I can't help but think that had it not been for the government's interference, who really are the main villains of Basilisk in a lot of ways, Tenzin would have found a way to make peace. He really would have. So really, in a lot of ways, as bad as he was a victim of circumstance to an extent, and just the times that he was born into. And who knows, maybe that's what he was ultimately meant to be, the ultimate antagonist within a series. So, Basilisk, yeah, one of my favorite anime series, and Tenzin, my favorite anime villain. And now, for who I believe to be the greatest villain in anime. Question number 1. Now, a lot of people picked some great stuff for this, and I think the two most obvious ones would be Griffith from Berserk and Johann Liebertz from Monster. Two fantastic villains. Oh, I love both those villains, love both those series, and I really would give it to them either day. Absolutely, they're definitely good choices. But you know what? For the sake of being different, I honestly think this guy's a pretty good contender, and I've discussed this with a few people. This guy is very underrated, and that would be Swetengu from Speedgrapher. This guy is one of the coldest, evilest individuals I've ever come across in anime. Throughout the series, we see him using the main character as a pawn in his plan to essentially take over the entire Japanese economy. He lives and breathes money and material possessions because that's the world that he's in, and he revels in it. He believes that anyone can be bought or sold, everyone has a price, and money and power and prestige are far more important than any human life. Another individual who truly embraced the darkness within his soul, who climbed the economic ladder and the social classes, got to the very top. And he seems like the evilest, most frightening individual, and you just hate him. The audience is meant to hate this character. There's no way you could possibly like him. And then we find out his origin, how he got the way he was, what made him into the individual that he would ultimately become. We find that Swetengu was a man who, when he was very young, he was sold into slavery, as was his younger sister, because his parents owed a debt to some criminals that he could not pay. He was essentially forced to be a soldier, sent to fight in foreign wars that he had no hand in, any reason for fighting in, losing any real sense of compassion or sense of righteousness, and he became a victim to various experiments which destroyed any aspects of humanity he once had. And on top of that, he finds his sister and what happens to her, and I won't spoil it, but she's essentially sold into a form of slavery as well. And when he finds out what happened to her, the last little bit of his humanity just is completely wiped. At least initially it seems so. But it turns out that his ultimate goal is actually kind of a good thing. He was an individual from humble beginnings who wanted to work his way up to high levels of Japanese society to destroy the corruption from within, to destroy the economy, so that the things that happened to him and his sister will be less likely to occur in the future. So despite all the horrible things that he's doing, even though he ultimately embraced the ideal, led to tragedy that befell him and his sister, he was essentially trying to avenge her and create a better world. So it's one of the questions about the ends justifying the means, and once again, I won't spoil it exactly, but Swetengu is one of the few villains in anime that actually wins. I have to say, greatest anime villain of all time is Watengu from Speedgrapher. I'm glad you guys enjoyed that a while back. Hope